Alright YouTubers, how you diddling? This is the Disposalist, and this will be my 5th beginner's guide for Battlefield 1. In this video I'm going to talk about the support class and his primary weapons. I'd recommend you go back and view the videos on the medic and the assault also, though. As I've gone through these videos I've explained more fundamental mechanics and details as I've gone along, and I won't be repeating myself really, so you might get a little bit lost if you jump in these later videos. And also the perspective with what the other classes' weapons can do I think is pretty valuable to understanding what your own preferred classes' weapons do. But we're talking about support weapons and the support class now, so the first thing I'm going to do is talk about a couple of unique aspects to the support primary weapons, and the first one of these is suppression. If we look at the first gun, Lewis gun suppressive, it says this LMG pattern offers improved suppressive capability, but what is suppression? I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but suppression is an effect that you inflict on your enemies when you're firing near them. Your near misses make them suppressed, and of course with a light machine gun where you're firing so many bullets at them, the suppression effect is much more likely to take effect. Now suppression, when it takes effect on the enemy, there's an initial flinch, so their actual vision flinches. There's increased sway on their part. They can't hold their weapon still very easily. It's almost like the sway effect you get normally from breathing, but exaggerated. There's increased spread on their guns. They're actually less accurate when they fire. They can't heal. It arrests any healing process they have and it stops them from healing. And there's some visual effects, a sort of tunnel vision, blackening around the edge of your vision when you are suppressed. So inflicting suppression on someone is a good thing for your survival and for your teammates' survival, and LMGs are especially good at inflicting the condition. I have to say I don't know if LMGs have any statistical advantage over other weapons at inflicting suppression. That is what I have heard, but I've seen no proof of that or any figures to support it. So more than the fact that they fire an awful lot more bullets down at your enemies than others do, I don't know if there's an increased chance specifically from light machine guns. Another couple of things that light machine guns have that others don't really is negative first shot multiplier and negative per shot spread increase. Now that sounds pretty complicated, but what we're talking about with negative shot multipliers and negative spread increases is when you fire the light machine gun and you keep your finger on the trigger, the more bullets, the longer you keep your finger on that trigger, the more bullets you fire, the more accurate your gun is, the less spread is inflicted upon you. So unlike submachine guns and unlike when you fast fire your medic rifles, the spread doesn't increase, it doesn't compound, it actually gets better. You will get more accurate as you continue to fire, and that's unique to light machine guns. And another thing to talk about because of that, I guess, it doesn't really affect other weapons, is the minimum spread in comparison between light machine guns is important then, because the spread will reduce but only down to a certain degree, and some of these light machine guns have a lower minimum spread than others. So now I've covered those basic differences of light machine guns, I'm going to talk to you about the individual variants. I'm not going to cover in detail any variants that are common with the other classes because, as we've discovered, every variant has the same characteristics across the different classes, but suppressive variant is one we haven't come across before. That's unique to support and light machine guns. So what suppressive means is a bigger magazine. All the suppressive machine guns have a bigger magazine. Obviously, the more bullets you can fire, the more suppression you can inflict upon the enemy. And when you are laying down suppressive fire, you really shouldn't be worried about how many bullets you're firing. The more, the better. So bigger magazine is great. Suppressive variants always have a bipod also. This is handy for getting near your targets to be able to suppress people from a distance. If I didn't mention before, suppression is actually something that works better the further away you are. So a bipod is handy for that distance work. Also underlying that you can't see from any of the charts and figures here is that there's slightly worse negative spread and spread recovery in a suppressive version. So all LMGs have, as I mentioned, this negative per shot spread increase. It's actually not as good with these suppressive guns, so they don't become as accurate as their other variants. But hey, you've got the bipod. that negates recoil effects and it improves the spread ability, so when you're bipodded it doesn't really matter that the suppressives are slightly less accurate than their equivalent variants. So I'm not going to cover the other variants that we've seen in other classes in too much detail. The optical, as we know by now, improves your aimed accuracy, your accuracy when aiming down at sights. Your low weight variants regain accuracy more quickly. That is, they have better recoil and spread decrease. They calm down between firing volleys quicker than their other variant equivalents. Storm versions are simple reduction in recoil characteristics. They recoil less. Now telescopic, this is a new variant. What this means is it's better ADS when not moving, when you're aiming down the sights, even better than the optical versions. You have aiming down the sights accuracy when you're not moving only though, which is quite often of course because the telescopics have a bipod. And we know the help the bipod gives you. It eliminates recoil completely and reduces spread a lot. This telescopics also have better spread decrease, so they recover well from the inaccuracies of prolonged fire, and they've got slightly better negative per shot increase. So again, that's that weird characteristics that LMGs have. They get better as you keep firing, the accuracy, when these telescopic versions are even better than the rest of the LMGs in general. The telescopic variants, of course, also have a scope, as you'd imagine from the name. That's the little box scope on the back there. And I guess I should have said the suppressives also are scoped variants, but that scope is just slightly different. The effect is the same, of course. Finally, we have trench variants with light machine guns, which work just the same as the other classes. It's improved accuracy when hip firing. And I just realized that I spoke about low weight as if we'd seen it before. We have, but in medic and assault that's called factory, but low weight is exactly the same, but for light machine guns. So that's the variants covered quite quickly, and you'd think that would make the LMGs quite easy to compare, that the variants are reasonably simply described. But the variants are spread across the different weapons in different ways, so they're actually hard to compare across the whole lot. So bear with me if this does get a bit complicated. Hopefully I've simplified it enough. They do still fall into two families, I've noticed. Much like the medic weapons fell into a sort of short range and long range capability family, the assault weapons obviously are in two different families, shotguns and submachine guns. There's a similar thing with the light machine guns. The Madsen, the Bar and the Schaushat tend to have better hip fire and better close range capability. The Lewis gun, the Bene Mercier and the Huot tend to have better long range ability, and as you'll see when we get to it, the MG15 is a little bit of an outlier. It does have good long range capability, but it's a little bit special. So I'm going to begin by talking about the Lewis gun, and the first thing to mention is minimum damage. The minimum damage of the Lewis gun is 15 per bullet, which means at range it has 7 shots to kill. The reason it's important to talk about this for light machine guns, it's one of the ways to compare them. The maximum damage per bullet is the same for all the light machine guns, apart from one exception. We'll talk about that later. So they all have the same maximum damage. The way to compare them then is to compare their minimum damage and the drop-off distance that they have. And you can see from the chart here, the maximum damage distance before any drop-off is up to, what, 15 meters or so. Oops, really quite close range. It then begins to drop off until at about 50 meters you've got to your minimum damage, which, as I say, for the Lewis gun is 15, 7 shots to kill at distance. The next thing to talk about that differentiates light machine guns is the rate of fire. Now, they've all got a pretty high rate of fire. That's part of the point of having a light machine gun. Compare that to something like an automatic submachine gun though, with 900 rounds per minute, and it's not amazing, but it's certainly a good rate of fire considering you're going to be throwing maybe 100 bullets down the range in quite short order. Now I'm looking at the suppressive version here. That does have 97 bullets in its drum, but the other two Lewis guns have 47. If I didn't mention it before when I was talking about the suppressive variant, one of the things that suppressive means is it has twice as many bullets. You can see the suppressive MG15 has 200 bullets before it has to reload, whereas the normal variant has 100. So the suppressive fluid gun has 97. It does actually overheat at about 50, so you'll need to give it a few seconds before you can fire the rest of that drum. But the optical and low weight versions, 47 bullets before they reload, and you can do that without it overheating. The only other thing to talk about, which isn't mentioned here, is the velocity of the rounds. And as we know, this is important because high velocity rounds mean they travel to the target quicker. You don't have to lead running targets or moving targets quite as much as you might have had to do otherwise when they're at a distance. And obviously that is better for your accuracy on moving targets and distant targets. So the next comparable long-range family weapon is the M1909 Benet Mercier. Now these have a minimum damage of 19, so let's looking at the drop-off. You can see it doesn't drop off as much, and it drops off earlier though to that minimum damage. So again, you've got full damage short range, 23 per bullet short range, but then by about 30-35 meters it's dropped down to 19 damage per shot, which is 5 shots to kill. The rate of fire is 450 rounds per minute, which is similar, 480 for the Lewis, 450 for the Benet Mercier, slightly slower. The ammunition that you have is 30. You've got a 90 reserve, but 30 in that bar of bullets there, and they can all be fired before any overheat, of course. The velocity of the bullets is much better with the Benet Mercier. It is 820 meters per second, which is as impressive as some of the sniper rifles. It really is a good bullet velocity. You're not going to have to lead your targets much at distance. And one thing that the Benet Mercier has over the Lewis and its equivalents are as better recoil characteristics in general there with the Benet Mercier. I'm sure I've mentioned before, but these hidden characteristics like velocity and recoil I'm getting from the simthic.com site, which has a plethora of data. It's where a lot of my information for this video and my other videos has come from, but obviously you can appreciate I'm compiling and comparing tables and tables of data to try and bring you a more useful summarized version of the data. So the last to talk about in the long range family is the Huot automatic. Now this is the machine gun that the support class gets at rank 10. And as such it's a little bit special, a bit like the rank 10 weapons that come with the medic and with the assault we've seen. They're sort of a combination of variants, or at least they throw in a variant for free. And the Huot automatic is different from the other guns in that it has storm-like capabilities for free, and of course the storm variant is improved recoil. So your Huot automatic has improved recoil, and of course then the low weight variant on top of that, or the optical variant on top of that, improve things further. So just to go over the figures, the Huot is pretty much like a Lewis but with improvements. So it's got the minimum damage of 15, much like the Lewis. The damage drop-off chart is in fact exactly the same as the Lewis. So at about 50 meters you're seeing a minimum damage of 15, which is 7 shots to kill. The rate of fire is almost the same, 475 against 480. The magazine is smaller, 28 bullets, but you have a good reserve of 100. The velocity is the same, 740 meters per second, and another additional hidden thing it has is it has good aiming down the sights when not moving, which is a little bit like the optical capability, but the Huot optical here has even better aiming down the sights capability, so that's very accurate indeed when aiming down the sights and standing still. But both Huots have good aiming down the sights capability when standing still. So that's your Huot. So now to talk about the short range close quarters family, the Madsen, the Bar and the Shaoshat. So first of all, the Madsen. The minimum damage here is 17.5, that's 6 shots to kill, and we can see from the drop off chart that's at about 45 meters, 40-45 meters. The rate of fire is 540, which is an improvement over all of the longer range versions. It's got a very good time to kill calculated. The magazine is 31 bullets with a reserve 93. The velocity is 800, which is good. As I say, that's up there with some sniper rifles. Madsen trade-off there is it has bad recoil characteristics, in comparison to other LMGs. As I say, the reason that the Madsen, the Bar and the Shat are what I would call close quarters short range family is because they have very good hip fire capabilities, where the others have good aiming down the sights capabilities, relatively speaking. So next up we're talking about the Bar, the Browning automatic rifle. The Bar has a minimum damage of 19, which is equivalent to the Bene Mercier. That gives it 5 shots to kill at its drop-off range, which is shorter than the Madsen. You can see here the drop-off range is sort of 35 meters or so. It has a rate of fire of 600, which is greater than the Madsen, and possibly the best time to kill overall, the quickest weapon or quickest damage output at least. Its magazine is small, 20 bullets there, 20 but 100 reserve, which is nice. And you can also see it's got a single shot fire mode if you so desire. I can't imagine why you would. I suppose it would work like an assault rifle. And I suppose that's a lot of the reason why some support people love this, because it's the equivalent, it's the nearest to an assault rifle weapon that you're going to get in this game possibly. So the velocity of the bullets is 820, very impressive indeed, better than some sniper rifles. And it has a quick reload compared to the others, and that's about it for the differences of the Bar. It's got a good minimum damage, a good rate of fire, a small magazine but high velocity bullets, and a quick reload. And the Shat is the last in this family. This was in the They Shall Not Pass downloadable content, and it has a minimum damage of 23. This is the unique one I was talking about earlier. All the other light machine guns have a maximum damage of 23 per bullet. The Shat, that's the minimum. It has a maximum damage of 35 at maximum damage, close range, which is short. We're talking at about 10 or 12 meters according to the drop-off chart. The maximum damage is 35, which is 3 shots to kill at short range. Minimum damage is 23, which is 5 shots to kill, and that minimum damage you can see there is at about 40 meters that it comes down to. So you could consider this a short range weapon, but it does a lot of damage. The rate of fire is 360, and of course it does a lot of damage, but if you put that up against that relatively low rate of fire, does it really have the best output of damage? Well, no, but close range it probably is the quickest time to kill still, because it does that maximum damage that's bigger than the others. So even with that low rate of fire, it has a massive damage output at short range, but it's looking pretty comparable to the others as you go out to longer ranges. It's got a low velocity as well, so, compared to the others, 720 meters per second. So again, distance is not as good as the others. It has a low magazine, like the Bar, 20 bullets, 80 in reserve. A couple of other things you wouldn't know that's in the Synthic data is it has worse vertical recoil, so that's really going to buck up in your hands, and good horizontal recoil though, less chattering to the left and right. So the last light machine gun to talk about, which doesn't really fall into either the short or long range families, is the MG15. So it was difficult to come up with the comparison to the MG15 because it didn't fall into one of those families, but once I had worked it out, it's actually a reasonably simple choice. The MG15 doesn't offer you improved long range accuracy, it doesn't offer you improved hip firing accuracy. What it does offer you is high velocity. It has the highest velocity, 870 meters per second, which, although it doesn't improve your accuracy per se, your spread at distance, it does mean that you have to lead your targets less at distance. You get less bullet drop at distance, so it's perhaps more accurate in that it's easier to judge those targets. Of course, you get a 100 bullet magazine with the Storm and the low weight, a 200 bullet magazine with the suppressive. You can only fire about 35 bullets before that overheats and needs a couple of seconds and a recock, but that's still an awful lot of bullets before you have to reload, which is good because that reload takes longer than the other LMGs. The rate of fire is pretty average between the two families, 500 rounds per minute. The minimum damage is 17.5, that's 6 shots to kill, and the drop-off chart there is similar to the Madsen, so that 6 shots is to kill is at just under 50 meters. So what you're really getting from the MG15 is a toss-up. You are looking at a 100 bullet magazine and a reasonable rate of fire with a high velocity, but you're not getting the long range accuracy, the spread reduction that you would with the long range family, and you're not getting the excellent hip fire that you do with the short range family. Having said that, if you take that MG15 suppressive, put on a nice long range scope, you can take down a bomber after a few passes with 200 bullets. So it has its uses. You can even counter snipe with that thing because of the high velocity of the bullets and a scope. It's and the amount of bullets you can rain down on a sniper in the distance. The lack of long range accuracy of spread that perhaps the Lewis, the Benet Mercier and the Huot have, it doesn't matter with that MG15. You've got long range capability in a way. So you can see, as I hinted at earlier, the comparison across the light machine guns is a little more complex than some of the other classes, perhaps because you've got to weigh up the minimum damage, the maximum damage in the case of the Shaoshat, the drop-off range that minimum damage occurs, the rate of fire that you get, and so the output of damage over time will vary depending upon the minimum damage against the rate of fire, the magazine size and to how convenient that can be, larger magazine, smaller magazine being inconvenient, but does it matter if you're killing things quickly? The velocity can make a difference, as you see with the MG15. There's an awful lot of things to think about when comparing the light machine guns. In some ways they're really quite similar, and so that makes that choice more difficult. So I'd advise trying them all, but as I say, there's a family there. The Madsen, the Bar and the Huot tend to be the Shaoshat, Madsen and Bar tend to be your short range CQC capability. The Lewis, the Benet Mercier and the Huot are your longer range, and then there's the MG15 for that special loads of bullets and high velocity capability. So that's all I'm going to talk about for the support class. I'm not sure that was shorter than the others in the end, but if you liked this video, if you found it useful, please give me a thumbs up. If you really must, give me a thumbs down, and please leave me comments if you have any suggestions or ideas for other videos, or if you do your own videos and want to give me some advice. That's great. I love comments. Thanks a lot, YouTubers. See you next time. Cheers.